Hello friends, this is Jim with Science Talk. Well, here we go again. Human carbon emissions to rise in 2019. So, here comes another dismal forecast, right? Human carbon emissions are expected to rise this year. Forests may be unable to keep pace as global warming increases. I've done countless videos on this topic before, but like everything else, get new studies that refine the estimates or reinforce or confirm, support other studies so that we start getting the consensus of what is going on. So, the projection is that 2019 is going to be a hell of a lot worse as human carbon emissions climb yet even higher and higher. British meteorologists warned that although 2018 broke all records for greenhouse gas emissions, 2019 will see even more carbon dioxide take up long-term residence in the atmosphere. It will happen mainly for two reasons. Both of them are presumably under human control. Overall release of carbon dioxide from power stations, factory chimneys, cement quarries, vehicle exhausts, etc. will continue to rise with fossil fuel combustion, even though there's been greater investment than ever in renewable resources such as wind and solar. All those natural sinks that absorb extra carbon from the atmosphere and sequester it as living timber in the forests or bones and shells in the oceans are expected to underperform, meaning it's not going to keep pace. Now, this is largely because of natural cyclic variation in tropical climate, such as, for example, El Nino, and so El Nino Southern Oscillation, but also partly because humans continue to degrade ecosystems, be it cutting down forests, burning grasslands, degrading grasslands, and all to get to more fossil fuels to burn ever more. And of course, if you cut down the forests, you're reducing the capacity to pull CO2 out of the atmosphere. Not only that, what do the plants, when they respire, they put oxygen back in the atmosphere. So you're going to leave more CO2 in the atmosphere and less oxygen in the atmosphere. Double whammy. Climate scientists know what is going to happen because they can already able to model and see what the future is going to bring us, because there's a 60-year-old cycle of data recorded high on a mountaintop in Hawaii, of course in the Pacific, and in this place is far from any heavy industry or even city pollution that might distort the local chemistry of the atmosphere. So Richard Betts, who is of the UK Met's Office Hadley Centre, states that since 1958, monitoring at the Mauna Loa Observatory in Hawaii has registered around a 30% increase in the concentration of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. You may recall that it was at this observatory that first recorded the CO2 parts per million exceeding 400 for the first time several years back. Of course, fossil fuel emissions, deforestation, cement production, because cement is using lime and calcium carbonate, that process puts out CO2. And those emissions would have been larger if were not for natural carbon sinks, which can soak up the excess CO2. And I've done reports previously discussing all of this. Dr. Betts continues to state, this year we expect these carbon sinks to be relatively weak, though the impact of record high human-caused emissions will be larger than last year. At the heart of this prediction, diagnosis if you will, is the increasing understanding of the role of the world's great oceans in managing planetary weather patterns. Specific heat. Sum that up in two words: specific heat. I've discussed that concept with you guys before, but it's basically the amount of energy needed to increase a certain amount of a substance, 1 degree C. The specific heat of water is considerably higher than that for the atmosphere or even the ground, meaning that it takes a lot more energy to heat it up, to raise it 1 degree C, but it also retains the heat, so it cools down slower. So when we see a 1 degree increase in ocean temperature versus a 1 degree increase in the atmosphere, there is, to be blunt, a shitload more energy that has to have gone into the ocean to raise it at 1 degree C compared to the atmosphere. A year ago, the tropical Pacific was relatively cool, rainfall increased, and land-based ecosystems flourished, soaking up atmospheric carbon. In a relatively warm cycle, many regions become warmer and dry, which in turn limits plant growth. Carbon dioxide ratios in the global atmosphere for most of human history until the Industrial Revolution and the arrival of the steam age and the internal combustion engine was around 280 parts per million. That was about, what, 1847 or so that the Industrial Revolution began? In 2018, a measurement of close to 415 parts per million in May was measured. I've seen other studies that have reported ppm levels of 421 or so. But the point is, even if you just take 410, lowball it, 280 to 410, that's what, 130 parts per million increase over basically 170 years. Not quite 1 part per year. That's still a significantly very high, fast rate of increase. So let's see. Basically, they also looked at El Nino. The average for 2018 was 411 parts per million with an uncertainty factor of 0.6 ppm. Translation, error. So basically 411 plus or minus 0.6. That's what that statement says. In 2019, the average is likely to be 2.75 ppm higher still. This would be one of the largest annual rises on record. The increases in 2015, 2016, and in 1997-98 were higher, but those years' readings were distorted by El Nino, which can cause sudden and often dramatic, damaging shifts in regional climate patterns that are basically felt quite a distance away. I am putting together a video series where I'm going to discuss in detail ENSO, the North Atlantic Oscillation, or the NAO, the Pacific Decadal Oscillation, the PDO. It sometimes goes by other names, but those are 3 major systems that do affect the climate. So when climatologists create their models, they take that into account. So they tease out the signal supplied by those systems, and then look at, the signal supplied by humans. And remember, using isotopic fractionation, they can identify the source for each CO2 molecule. I did a very lengthy video on isotopic fractionation. If you haven't already seen it, please check it out. Or if you just want to watch it again, please do so. So, Julianne Strove of University College London called the news discouraging, for sure. Last year, the extra CO2 was equivalent to melting approximately 110,000 square kilometers of Arctic sea ice, or roughly 3 times the area of Switzerland. And sea ice loss is directly tied in to increases in atmospheric CO2. Josh Barlow of Lancaster University Environment Center warned that forest clearance in the tropics continued as a hazard. He says, deforestation in the Brazilian Amazon increased to around 8,000 square kilometers in 2018, which is equivalent to losing a football pitch of forest every 80 seconds. This alone would result in CO2 emissions that exceed those of the UK over the same time period. Back to Professor Betts. He called the Mauna Loa record of atmospheric carbon dioxide a thing of beauty, i.e. the data is really nice, and a stark reminder of human interference with the planetary climate. Looking at the monthly figures, it is as if you can see the planet breathing as the levels of CO2 fall and rise. With the seasonal cycle of plant growth and decay in the northern hemisphere, but each year CO2 is higher than the last, and this will keep happening until humans stop adding CO2 to the atmosphere. Basically, what it's saying is that CO2 levels will increase during the wintertime because a lot of plants, especially if the deciduous trees and so on, have dropped their leaves. They're not photosynthesizing, so they're not drawing down the CO2. Whereas come springtime, summertime, the CO2 levels will drop because the trees bud out, they've got leaves, they've got photosynthesis going on, they're sucking down the CO2, etc. That's basically what he was referring to there. So humans continue to basically crap in our bed, continue to make things extremely unsustainable for humans, as well as other organisms who may not be able to adapt fast enough to these rapid changes. I have an upcoming, well actually, so anyway, levels going up. So even though they're trying to increase the use of solar and wind and so on, it's not enough to offset what is happening. Thank you for your time. Hey friends, this is Jim reminding you to subscribe and share my videos. Also, don't forget to click the bell so that you know when I drop a video in. And I'm also asking for you to please support the work that I do by becoming a patron at patreon.com. Details in the description box below. Thank you for your continued support.